Hey everyone, welcome to Do Good Work. So if you're a designer or creative like me, I'm sure you've had a project or two in your day where you were super excited out of the gate, but for whatever reason, the project either didn't get off the ground because the client killed it, or the project got completed, it solved the client's problems, but for whatever reason, the creative just fell a bit flat for you. Well, you're not alone, because we experienced that too. And the big question at the end of a project is, what do you do next? Do you actually put that project that never got completed in your portfolio? Or is the project strong enough where it's going to attract that next client that you want? So in this episode, we're going to share a recent talk that I did at ArtCenter where we talk about this very topic, on how we were able to take client projects and turn them into passion projects and make it something that our entire team can rally behind and ultimately turn them into workhorses for our portfolio. So sit back and enjoy the video. Hello everyone, I'm Aaron Atchison. And just really excited to be here and to geek out about packaging with you guys. What we thought would be fun to share is our process on a couple of projects that didn't necessarily go to plan and how we navigated these sticky situations to turn pain points into positives. Because in our industry, roadblocks are common, things can go left, things change at the drop of a hat, but you have to be able to be prepared to be flexible. And tonight I'll be sharing how we took two projects that we either had projects going sort of heading off track or potentially left to never see the light of day, and turning them into opportunities that not only fuel our creativity but provide impact in our portfolio. So we're going to demonstrate how we were able to pivot on a couple of projects. We're going to be sharing Darling Kombucha and Good Milo. My company is called Farm Design. For those of you who don't know, I grew up in Montana, a really small farm. And one thing that I was taught from my father is to feed the soil and not the plant. And so that's always stuck with me, even to how I work and implement that as a professional. And that foundation is really key. That sort of is the root for all of our sort of creative work that you see. But it all starts with a process. And we need that process to sort of guide all the steps that we take. But from my experience, I've never had a client that has been the same from another. They all have different challenges. They have different consumer types. And so with that in mind, I don't like to have a rigid process. I like to keep it really fluid and open. However, we still need a process. And so I like to simplify it as much as possible. So we sort of structured it into 3 phases. They're very logical, they're very sequential, and it allows us to solve problems, but also give us roadmap to make sure that we're moving forward. The first step that we have is what we call discover. And this underpins all the work that I'm about to share with you today. And this is this is very foundational. This is the research and strategy stage. And at this stage we are really capturing a lot of insight with our clients. We want to be very intimate. We normally do these with workshops. And we like to call it brand therapy because we really ask a lot of questions because we believe our clients have all the answers. We just need to ask the right questions. So what we want to understand from the brands is from the inside so that we can help transform the outside. Once we have a strong foundation, we synthesize these into a physical deck that we share with the client. We get a sign off from the client. And then we can confidently move on to the second phase of our journey, which is a visualize stage. And this is where we add visual and verbal to a brand and start to give it shape. And this is probably one of the more exciting parts of the process for us because we can start to manifest all of that research and strategy and start to give it some shape. Once we've established a really strong brand foundation, created a strong brand suite of artifacts, then we go into the final stage, which is bring it to life, which is we start to see how all of those elements can come to life in its environments, whether it's in packaging, social, web, trade show booths, print collateral. And then it's our job at this stage to also be very meticulous around production and execution. We shepherd this with the client through the complexity of post-production to make it real and ensure quality standards are met. The first project I'm going to share is Darling Kombucha. It's from an existing client of ours, and the last time I had the privilege of speaking here was I shared Better Booch. We did this maybe 4 or 5 years ago. At the time, the client was small and local. They were able to find some traction in regional markets, but they really wanted to sort of extend into national markets. And through our branding efforts, we were able to establish a really strong visual and verbal sort of brand system for them that allowed them to become a national brand. And currently they're located in all 50 states with large distribution. And because of that success, that this client was able to grow into the next life stage of the company, which allowed them to innovate and actually acquire other businesses. And through that, they came to us for that next innovation, which is to create a hard kombucha line, which made a lot of sense because they had the infrastructure, they had the manufacturing, everything was in place in the bottling. So doing this sort of seemed like a no-brainer to us. So we already had a relationship with them, and we had intimate knowledge of how they sort of tick. They also had understanding about our process, so we really were able to hit the ground running with them. So going back to the first phase is we want to capture as much information as we possibly can. And being fluid in that process is really important because through the conversations, what we're trying to discover is these interesting sort of trailheads of creativity and opportunities with the client. And once we start to find those trailheads, then we start to walk down these paths with them to see and look for opportunities and see what's around the corner, because I think that's where most of the creativity is found. This particular client was very visually motivated. She actually provided a lot of visual inspiration behind this brand. A lot of it sort of had this rustic, nostalgic look, a lot of sort of found labels, and it was really cool and rich, and it had a lot of culture behind it. But it was very interesting because she had a sensibility as well to have these sort of contemporary, almost trendy sort of style. And so we like to call it sort of like a neutral style where we kind of like mash these things up. So that was really exciting for us to have this as sort of an impetus to sort of move forward on the visual stage. But we can't just rely on visual. We also need to have a lot of sort of parameters and sort of be able to be empathetic to the consumer. We like to take a very consumer-centric point of view with our branding. And so we wanted to capture who these personas, try to get an understanding of who they are, what makes them tick, and understand what's familiar to them in this space so we can craft a language that they can be accustomed to. It's also very important that we want to understand why people should care. And so if there are unique qualities around the brand, we want to understand what those are so we can capture those things, because they're oftentimes superpowers behind what they are and allows them to separate and position themselves against other competitors. One of the other key components that was given to us was the name. It's called Darling. There wasn't anything sort of legacy behind it. There wasn't a clear story behind it. The founders just really thought it phonetically rolled off the tongue. She also liked it because it was sort of intimate, and there was some emotive qualities to it. And it had this sort of, this gesture as sort of a response to a loved one. And so we used that, and we worked with the copywriter to start to give it shape and start to like build a story behind what Darling can be. And so we started to develop what we call these sort of verbal territories. And we built out a number of these, and we settled on 4 territories that we really enjoyed and got the client to sign off on it. And the inspiration behind a lot of these territories is, it is a hard kombucha, so it kind of has these qualities of sort of taking you to this altered state. So we really wanted to lean in on that when we're going into the creative process. It sort of reminded us of sort of getting to this altered state, sort of this surrealism, this ethereal space. It reminded us of dreams or memories, and so these were some interesting creative jumping off points. So from that, we go into a creative stage, and the ask was pretty clear. They wanted to sort of scaffold the phasing, so they didn't want to allocate too much budget into the project initially. So they just tasked us with building a brand system and a packaging line, which included 5 flavor SKUs. And instead of just providing the can, which was the main touch point, it's really important for us to do these things called stylescapes, which is really essentially a mood board on steroids. It allows us to sort of capture the brand in an environment and make it very immersive, so we can kind of get like a gut feeling behind how this sort of concept starts to feel. it gives a sort of brand essence. It's a combination of colors and textures and artifacts, as well as voice. And we do this across a number of the concepts, and I think we came up with 5 or 6 concepts, and we try to capture a spectrum. It's really important to understand what the limits of those spectrums are. We want to tap into both sides and everything in between, and we're trying to find all of those opportunities. From here, the client was really excited about one concept, and we start to go into what we call a prototype and iterate stage, where we start to explore all the possibilities, to start to flesh out all the nuances of the packaging. This is just a Dropbox link, just to give you an idea. We went through 9 rounds of iterations with them, and we settled on a really great place where we had a really strong brand suite of artifacts, all the way from doing custom illustrations, understanding what the color palette is, ultimately to the final touch point, which is the can sleeves. And we did 5 of these, and we worked closely with their print vendors to make sure that everything was to spec and to their printing requirements. And this is typically where that's the end of the ask. So we accomplished our task. This is where we typically kind of hand the keys off to the palace, and now it's up to the client. And so all we have left is just to sit there and wait. And this is always one of those nervous points in the process is are they going to see it through? And so it's kind of our job to check in and make sure their hand is held, asking if they need any of our help. And after a few months, we kind of got an unsettling feeling. And the project that we were toiling away with for so long is they let us know that they had to kill the project. And it's one of those sort of gut punch feels that you have in the sort of creative space is you put so much energy into something, and for it not to see the light of day is one of those things. And so it happens. And where do you go from there? It's like, how do we pick up the pieces? You almost take it a little personally. I mean, it's hard. You're not your work, but sometimes, I mean, we are creative. I'm sensitive. But oftentimes these projects just end up dying and never sees the light of day. We end up moving on to the next creative or client project, and we just keep forging ahead. But there was something about this project that, we couldn't just let it go. It was something, we put so much work into it, something we're incredibly proud of. And so as a team, instead of it just sort of letting it live in the archives and those folders, the obscurity on Dropbox, we said, maybe we should do something with this. Maybe we can make this an opportunity. So all the work that we did, all the foundation, it was still so incredibly viable. So we wanted to keep the excitement and momentum going. So we reached out to the client and we asked if it was okay if we can actually show the portfolio or the project in our portfolio. And they were super cool. They said, absolutely, you can do it. And they were very apologetic about not being able to bring the project to life. But now things have changed. We were able to pivot. But now we weren't attached to the client. We had creative freedom to build it however we wanted, which was free and it was very liberating. We wanted to take those opportunities to sort of create and expand the project and sort of stretch our creative chops on this. It's very much like you guys, a lot of students in this room, and it's something I'm very envious of, is when I was a student, is that yes, there are briefs and there are some parameters, but as a student, really, what are you bound by? What are the confines? And so I really, when I was a student, I would just push the limits on as much as possible, be very experimental. And so this was one of those opportunities that we wanted to take with this project. And so we got it to pretty close to the end of the second phase, and now we wanted to flesh it out and see it further even to the third phase, which is bring it to life. And in order to do that, we wanted to expand the brand system and start to look at it, how it can live in its environment. Understanding who the consumer type was, it was targeted for young millennials, very trendy. And so we started to look into other spaces, not only in the sort of the liquor or the alcohol space, but in sort of other peripheral spaces as well, like THC and CBD. And we started to try to get inspired by other graphics that are surreal and ethereal to sort of like as jumping off points. And we take those moments and we start to merge all the verbal and visual, bringing it to life through animations and through video. We then execute renders and we flesh them out across all of the SKUs and demonstrate how they all sort of work together as a family, as a shelf set. it was also really important for us to sort of really build out that strong verbal language. And we wanted to not just be language in itself, but we wanted to create this visual vernacular around the language, so when you see the language and the marketing material, that you would know what the brand is without even seeing the packaging. And this consumer type, where do they consume information, is largely on social. So we wanted to make sure we created graphics that worked well for your mobile devices, given its subtle animations and ambient graphics. We also were really excited about just the space in itself. So we wanted to create an environment for the environment. So we built out these really, again, these abstract, surreal sort of backgrounds for each can to live in, so they can have their own space. So from all of this is, we were able to pivot and repurpose what already existed, and we were able to salvage a project that could have otherwise been forgotten. We got something into our portfolio that we're excited to share, and it allowed us to flex our creative muscles and create with freedom. So that was project number 1. And I'm going to share the last project, which is called Good Milo. And the company started is actually the missing link. And I'll get to how we made some pivots in this project as well. And it's a pet food supplement company. It's an over 100-year-old brand. It's family owned. And they started to have some pain points in their company where they had so much innovation and there wasn't an in-house creative team that really kept the eye on the ball in terms of like where to manage the brand. They lacked architecture, they lacked consistency, and therefore they weren't really able to sort of get establish a lot of brand equity and get credit for what they were doing on shelf. And so they reached out to Farm Design to sort of help them sort of give it some structure and sort of give it some scalability, sort of future-proof the brand. So again, we go back to process, right? So the first leg in that process is we roll our sleeves up and we have some meaningful conversations. And we typically had a couple of workshops with them because there was a lot to unpack. These are just a few pages on our strategy deck. I think that looks like 15. I think we're closer to probably 70 or 80 pages that really wanted to pack all the facets and nuances of where we can take the brand. So I'm not going to bore you with all the minutia, but one of the key takeaways is we're looking at competitor sets, shelf sets. And there was this space, it was very sort of this sea of sameness that was happening. It was very mundane, it was very unaspirational. And we saw this as a great opportunity. Like, we can really puncture this market space by creating some tension in it and be able to stand out. One other thing that we learned in that discover phase is that there's a lot of D2C brands that were really taking up market share. And a lot of those D2C brands, they look a certain way. They were also targeted for a lot of the younger consumers. And so there's a certain minimalism in that space, and that's something that we took note of. We then take that strategy and then we go into the next phase, which is the visual phase. Again, we like to start with verbal. It really starts to inform a lot of the visual opportunities that we can explore. And so we start to capture this, and we had 4 really strong verbal spaces to jump off of, which led us into a number of creative options. Our goal here was, again, we wanted to sort of create tension in that space to stand out. And I'll be honest, it wasn't that hard. There was so many tropes within that space that we just needed to buck that system and try something new. We're also very inspired by a lot of what the D2C brands were doing, and I think that will allow them to sort of be able to sort of accomplish sales on both the retail and the D2C level. The client picked a concept. Is this one, because it had that sort of minimalism. It had that sort of trust and purity behind it as well, and it also be able to stand out on shelf. But through the process, and a lot of processes we have, sometimes things go a little sideways. And in this case, we had a new stakeholder that got involved. It was one of the owners, the owner's son actually, and he had a strong opinion. He really didn't want to let go of his logo, and so that changed the design quite a bit, and they wanted a lot of the type to be more right reading. They added a lot more type. And then they started to add colors, which were sort of legacy colors from their original packaging. So the more we went down this path with them, is it started to continue to mutate into something that was a little more familiar to what they had. And so it gave them comfort, but it made us feel rather uneasy. When we see these mutations happen, we can see it a mile away. But it's our job to sort of help shepherd and guide that process. It's our client. We're trying to serve them, and ultimately they're going to make the decisions. But when we're trying to right that ship, sometimes things are out of our control. And we just started to get that sinking feeling with this project. So for all intents and purposes, the project was a success. The client was happy. We got paid. We were a bit lukewarm with the way the final product sort of looked, and we weren't really all that jazzed as a team to sort of put it in our portfolio. So brought up the questions, how can we keep that excitement? How we can continue to do great work that we love? And at the end of the day, we are creatives, right? This is what gets me out of bed every day, is to build and create something. And so we can't let go of that. And so we said, it's pretty simple. We're going to make something new out of this. So we took this as an opportunity, rolled up our sleeves again. We wanted to try new techniques and build something from scratch, but using a lot of the heavy lifting that we already had done with that client. So we took a step back and we looked at some concepts. And this was one of the concepts that we started to gravitate towards. Again, this is sort of a stylescape. It's a little more expansive than the one that you'd seen before, but it really starts to project and talk a lot about the brand. So we have to be really careful. Could it be a slippery slope and sort of building a project off of one of these? So we had to make a lot of shifts. And one of the shifts was to sort of treat it like a new project. And so we wanted to give it a new name. We wanted to reposition the product from a supplement to a dog treat line. We came up with the name Good Milo, so we went through a whole naming exercise in-house, and we really liked where this settled. Phonetically, it sounded great. It was pretty straightforward. It had sort of training affirmations that you give dogs when you give them treats, and so it made a lot of sense to us. We also wanted to look back at who the consumer type was, because again, we take a consumer-centric point of view when we're building brands, and we're designing for them. And so these, again, pet-obsessed millennials. And the illustrator that we had curated in those initial concepts, his name is Timo Kilder. He's from Amsterdam. And so he was able to capture a lot of the essence that we thought would really speak volumes and amplify what the brand was to the consumers. So we reached out to him and we shared the concept, we shared our struggles, and we said, hey, would you be up for doing a passion project with us? And he was all on board. So fortunately, the illustrations that we had curated for those concepts, he had not used with the client, so we gave us free rein on those. Because we changed the product from a supplement to actually dog treats, is we need to look at new form factors. And so we wanted to create these interesting shapes that would be, it's a utility, so it allows you to sort of get in and out of the package. And we also want to make it young and fun. So we created die lines, we created mock-ups, and we ended up doing renders to sort of fully bake this brand into what we see here. It became a fresh new portfolio, something that we could really champion and get excited about. But of course, branding is more than just packaging. And so we want to put in a portfolio, and I mentioned earlier we have full capabilities, and so this was our opportunity. That's a green screen, I apologize. Is take this opportunity to continue to flesh out the brand beyond just the packaging, because these live in environments, and a lot of sort of friction points that we hear from our clients is, how do we take a brand system and extend it to marketing capabilities? And so we wanted to demonstrate that in this portfolio. So we went the extra mile to flesh these out across multiple touch points, breathing some life into it, considering how it's going to live in various spaces. And ultimately, this ended up a long way from where the client landed. We rallied behind a new idea that got us excited again. We got to try out new skills, and we were able to experiment and express the brand beyond just packaging. It was also less than 24 hours after we posted this on our Behance and our website that we got our first project inquiry from a large California-based pet food company. So these things do work. And so what I want to share with you as creatives, we're often told to have fun and follow our passions, but what does that look like in practice? How can we do this and accomplish all that we need to do to finish our client work, which quite literally keeps the lights on? And to what we give you is this advice, is you won't always be in control of your situation, but you will always be in control of what you put in there. So at the end of the day, your portfolio is to represent you. Yes, clients builds credibility, it makes money, it proves you can actually do what you say you can do, but deeply creative explorations is just as important. So take every opportunity you can to strike that balance. So thanks so much for your time. I hope you got something out of this, and thank you.